News Channel 8 with WTOP and the Washington Post. This is a special Vote 2014 presentation, the Maryland gubernatorial debate.
Affordable housing is important to me.
These are the issues.
Stop taking so much money out my check.
From Silver Spring.
What are we going to do about crime?
I mean, really, I guess all I care about is education.
To Laurel.
I think the Maryland economy and attracting more businesses to the state and reducing the burden on businesses.
And these are the candidates. The Democratic nominee, Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown, 52 years old, 8 years in office, military man, lawyer.
I bring a wealth of experience and perhaps even more importantly, passion to building a better Maryland for more Marylanders.
The Republican nominee, Larry Hogan, 58 years old, founder of a real estate firm, former state cabinet secretary, son of a congressman, political activist.
You know, I'm just a small businessman and a lifelong Marylander who loves the state. And I was really completely frustrated with politics as usual in Annapolis.
The campaign so far has been called among the most negative in the country.
He's desperately running false attack ads against me because they're afraid of losing the race. And they should be afraid because people don't want another 4 years like the past 8 years.
We're fighting for working families and middle class values, and he's protecting the smallest group of the largest, wealthiest corporations that need it the least.
And in a state where Democrats outnumber Republicans by a 2-to-1 margin, polls are showing an increasingly tight race. A Washington Post poll shows Brown leading Hogan 47 to 38%. A Gonzalez research poll says it's even closer, 47 to 43%. A Goucher poll found both candidates struggling to get their message out, with Hogan showing a 28% favorable opinion rating to Brown's 32% favorable rating. And strikingly, 45% of Marylanders don't yet have an opinion on either candidate. Of course, both candidates will tell you the only poll that matters is the one taken on Election Day, and that is why debates are so important, so voters can decide for themselves which candidate best meets their needs. So now, to News Channel 8's Bruce DePoit, the moderator of our debate between Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown and Larry Hogan.
Thank you, Brad Bell, and hello. I am Bruce DePoit, the host of News Talk here on News Channel 8. Welcome to this Vote 2014 special, a debate featuring the major party candidates for governor in Maryland. With us in the studio are Republican Larry Hogan and Democrat Anthony Brown. Gentlemen, thanks very much for being here. It's great to have you with us this time.
Thanks, Bruce.
Assisting me in asking questions over the next hour, journalists from the news organizations that are co-hosting this debate. Jenna Johnson, a reporter at the Washington Post. Sean Anderson, an anchor at WTOP. It's great to have both of you here. Great to be able to work with both of you today.
Same.
Thanks.
This debate is airing live on News Channel 8, and it is streaming live online at news8.net, WJLA.com, WTOP.com, and WashingtonPost.com. It will also air on WBFF, Fox 45 in Baltimore, on Maryland Public Television, on WNUV, and on C-SPAN. Each candidate will get 60 seconds to respond to each question posed. There will be one 45-second rebuttal, followed by any follow-up questions we wish to ask. And speaking of questions, you at home can suggest questions by using the hashtag MD Debate on Twitter. We'll do our level best to incorporate the best of your suggestions over the next hour. And with that, let's get started, gentlemen. Larry Hogan, because of a coin flip held prior to today's debate, you respond to the first question first. Maryland voters have approved at referendum gay marriage, the DREAM Act, a very liberal abortion rights measure, and a ban on Saturday night specials. If you're a mainstream Republican, you likely voted no on each of those. Are you, this year, asking voters to elect someone who doesn't share the state's basic values?
You know, all of those decisions are settled law at this point, and the voters of Maryland have made their decision. As governor of Maryland, when I take the oath of office, I take an oath to uphold the laws of Maryland, and we're not going to be taking any actions to roll back or change any of those measures. They're all decided at this point.
Mr. Brown, 60 seconds.
Sure, I supported the DREAM Act, I supported marriage equality, I supported the Firearms Safety Act of 2013 that's already showing a reduction in the number of gun-related violence in Maryland. Look, what Maryland voters need is a governor who has the courage of their conviction to not only just say, look, that's settled law and I won't repeal it, but the question is, are you going to vigorously enforce it? Are you going to fund the enforcement, and are you going to embrace it? Take, for example, the Gun Safety Act of 2013. Mr. Hogan, this is what voters just don't like about politicians. Mr. Hogan has told the public that he's not going to roll back the Firearm Safety Act of 2013, yet Washington Post expose showed that in a private discussion with gun rights activists, you said to them that you're going to roll back the provisions of the Firearm Safety Act, which is just devastating, would be devastating for Maryland. You have to have the courage of your convictions, stand up for what you believe. I supported the Firearm Safety Act. I supported the DREAM Act. I supported marriage equality. That's good for Maryland, and quite frankly, it's great for Maryland's business climate as we're attracting business and families to a reliably progressive state like Maryland.
Rebuttal, Mr. Hogan.
Well, the Firearm Safety Act that the Lieutenant Governor is referring to really didn't accomplish a whole lot. Quite frankly, I was disappointed that it didn't do anything to help keep guns out of the hands of the mentally ill, didn't do anything to help keep guns out of the hands of criminals, it didn't do anything about helping us do better background checks. Those are the three issues that I was focused on. Now, my opponent's running television commercials acting as if I'm in favor of assault weapons in schoolyards and shopping carts, and I can assure you that's not the case. My concern here was that the real issue is trying to keep guns out of the hands of the mentally ill, which we're one of the few states in the country that doesn't report mental illness. We're last, I think, in the country at this point. We don't take care of the national NICS system with instant federal background checks, which I think we should do.
Going back to my initial question, do you sort of get the drift of where I was going initially when I referenced the referenda, the many referenda that have occurred over time, where it's sort of that ultimate expression of democracy? Are your values Maryland's values?
Well, my values have been the same all along. So my opponent's been trying to misrepresent some of these positions and trying to make the campaign about these issues. The campaign is really, this election decision is about the state of our economy. It's about taxes. It's about jobs. Just because my opponent runs commercials over and over again trying to make it about something else isn't going to change the voters. I've been out all across the state talking with voters. That's not what they're interested in. But, with respect to those issues, as I said, none of that's going to change. It doesn't matter whether Anthony Brown is elected governor or whether I am. But we will be different on the economy.
Sean Anderson, a question for Lieutenant Governor Brown.
No follow-up on that?
No.
Or rebuttal?
I think it's covered. I think we'll move on.
Okay.
Lieutenant Governor Brown, Governor O'Malley placed you in charge of one of the most important programs of his 2 terms in office, the creation of the Maryland Health Exchange. The problems and glitches with the rollout have been very well documented, yet you have distanced yourself from the process that led up to a lot of the mistakes that cost taxpayers millions of dollars. The question is, how did this happen, and what is your plan to fix it before the next enrollment period?
Look, Sean, I've been really clear. I've said that everyone involved with standing up the exchange has responsibility, and that includes me. I presided over the Health Reform Coordinating Council. Part of that work was to establish this independent health benefits exchange, which is more than a website, it's a system. And when we set out to launch our exchange, Maryland, like every state and the federal government, had technical difficulties. And we did what Maryland voters expected us to do. We refocused the leadership at the exchange, got rid of some people. We refocused the vendors, many of whom that were not performing as promised under the contract. And we plussed up at call centers around the state. And what we did was we were able to roll 411,000 Marylanders who today have access to affordable quality health care when they were priced out of the market last year, parents who can keep their kids on their policy up to age 26, women who are no longer paying more for health insurance because they're women, because we rolled up our sleeves and got it done. It wasn't pretty. It was difficult work, and we enrolled 411,000 Marylanders.
Mr. Hogan, 60 seconds.
Well, it sounds like my opponent is happy with the success. He says he rolled up his sleeves and got it done. I have a completely different opinion of exactly what happened. The Lieutenant Governor, still on his website today, says that he was a leader in the nation in the rollout of the Affordable Care Act. The only thing we were a leader in is failure. We're the first state we've wasted $288 million on a website that doesn't work, as tens of thousands of Marylanders lost their health care coverage and the cost went up for everybody else. The Lieutenant Governor is one of the few real responsibilities he had over the past 8 years, and he failed miserably. We're the first state in the nation to abandon our entire site. And it's been a debacle. It's probably the biggest boondoggle in state history, and he's still not willing to take responsibility. It was his responsibility to oversee the contractors that failed. it's been a complete disaster. And it's a major issue in this campaign. It shows the leadership. It shows his ability to manage. And quite frankly, I don't think he showed us that he earned a promotion with his leadership of the healthcare.
Mr. Brown, 45 seconds for a rebuttal.
Sure. I spent a lifetime in service in Maryland, working to extend quality, accessible health care to more and more Marylanders. And why? I grew up in a home. My father is a physician. He treated and took care of patients in some of the poorest hospitals and neighborhoods near where I grew up. This is what my life service in public service has been all about. Look, you know, you're misleading again the voters with large million-dollar numbers about the costs of the exchange. It would have been more costly not to launch the exchange in Maryland. We now have some of the most competitive, the lowest rates of any state exchange. Our market is so competitive that additional carriers are coming into the market, which will drive down the cost of health insurance premiums. And we're now already seeing fewer uncompensated patients without insurance showing up in our emergency departments in Maryland. The cost of inaction would have been greater.
Did you have a follow-up, Jenna?
So are you saying that, you just said that it would have cost more to not fix the exchange, but you will acknowledge that it is costing tens of millions of dollars additional to fix the exchange, right?
Right. I think if you look at the experience around the nation, and whether it's Connecticut that has had the most successful launch, the federal government, or all of the states, every state in the federal government since the original launch has been investing more money to upgrade, improve, revamp, and modify. So Maryland's experience is not unique. This was a large IT undertaking, which we gladly undertook because we supported Maryland, the Affordable Care Act, that more and more families have access to affordable quality health care, covering their children who, you know, with pre-existing conditions or any other family member. Look, Mr. Hogan and I fundamentally disagree on health reform. I supported the Affordable Care Act because women now have access to health insurance without paying more. They have greater access to contraceptions, and this is where we fundamentally disagree.
Jenna, your next question is for Mr. Hogan.
Got it. Mr. Hogan, you've said that you want to get rid of stormwater mitigation fees that a lot of counties are now charging. That money goes to clean pollution out of rainwater before it reaches the Chesapeake Bay, something that's now federally mandated. But if you get rid of those fees, where are counties going to find the money to do that work? Or are you suggesting that they ignore federal mandate?
Well, stormwater management is an important issue, and it's something that we obviously need to work both with the state and the county governments to implement the federal requirement. What my concern is the rain tax that was instituted after 40 consecutive tax hikes that have taken an additional $10 billion out of the pockets of struggling Maryland families. We forced another tax on them for the rain that falls on the roof of their homes. Carroll County pushed back and said the state is trying to force counties to raise taxes. Carroll County pushed back and said, we can take care of this out of our existing budget. We don't need to raise taxes on people. But if you want to talk about finding money to clean up the bay and protect our environment and take care of stormwater management issues, there's plenty of money to go around. My opponent has drained $1.3 billion out of the environmental trust funds. They've taken money out of the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Fund, out of the Chesapeake Bay Trust. There's plenty of money to go around. If we hadn't raided the environmental trust funds, we wouldn't have to be pushing another tax down onto struggling Maryland families.
Lieutenant Governor Brown, 60 seconds.
Yeah, Larry, you know that during this recession and protracted recovery, there's not a single government program that didn't see either reduction in investments or flatline, and environmental programs were part of that. Look, Larry and I stand in two completely different places. I stand in the tradition of Marylanders who for centuries have understood we have to take a balanced approach to protecting the environment. Larry is standing somewhere upstream on the banks of the Susquehanna River, pointing to New York and Pennsylvania and accusing them of not doing what he refuses to do here in Maryland. State government worked with county governments. We gave them the authority to implement these stormwater management programs. Some counties had a fee. Others, like Prince George's County, very creative public-private partnership. It's actually insulting to say it's a rain tax. We're not taxing the rain. What we're doing is funding a program mandated by the EPA to reduce stormwater runoff carrying pollutants into the bay. It's good for safe drinking water and the tens of thousands of jobs that rely on a sustainable and clean bay.
Rebuttal, Mr. Hogan.
Well, again, we're the only state in the nation that taxes the rain, and we are forcing counties to charge taxes and fees onto people for the rainwater that falls on the roof of their houses and in their driveway. And it's ludicrous, and quite frankly, after the 40 taxes in a row, people aren't going to stand for it anymore. Most people are completely fed up with it. It's the least popular of all the taxes. It's not the worst one. It's not the one that takes the most money out of our pockets, but it's the one that people have the biggest problem with. And again, we do have a major difference of opinion. Lieutenant Governor, had you not taken the $1.3 billion out of environmental trust funds that were supposed to be in a lockbox, you know, it's called a trust fund for a reason, and now it's become a lack of trust fund. It has a lockbox, but you picked the lock, and you took money that should have gone to clean up the bay, and you wasted it in the general fund.
Response, if you want. I do have a follow-up.
I'll take the response.
Briefly,
absolutely.
yes,
Look, the balanced approach includes a stormwater management program. Mr. Hogan doesn't support that. The balanced approach includes working with the farmers, cover crop programs, putting land into program open space. In fact, Mr. Hogan's running mate, and if you want to talk about your commitment to the environment, your running mate, Mr. Rutherford, participated in backroom deals in the last administration selling environmentally sensitive land to developers. It was such a problem that we passed a constitutional amendment in Maryland to prohibit that kind of conduct. I don't know, Marylanders cannot be able to trust you on your position on the environment.
Well, that's just complete nonsense. First of all, let me defend my running mate, Secretary Boyd Rutherford, who led the entire green energy initiatives for the federal Department of Agriculture. Okay, he's the most qualified man to ever run for lieutenant governor. He ran a department with 100,000 employees, and he was in charge of all of their environmental activities for a pretty big department nationwide in the Bush administration. He also
can you speak to the specific allegation from Mr. Brown?
He just criticized my opponent for something, but I don't know what the heck he's talking about. What I do know is that that this administration, the biggest problem that we have facing the environment has been the O'Malley-Brown administration, and the fact that you failed to spend that $1.3 billion on cleaning up the environment and taking care of the bay. Now, you mentioned the Susquehanna River. I'm somewhere upstream. 43% of all the sediment that comes into the bay comes down the Susquehanna River over the Conowingo Dam. And yes, we can't put all the burden on struggling Maryland families. We do have to push back against the federal government, stand up for Marylanders, and make Pennsylvania and New York pay their fair share. They're the ones dumping the sediment into our bay.
Scientists and environmentalists that study these environmental issues say that the Conowingo Dam is a very small percentage. You're putting all your marbles in the Conowingo Dam, and that's not what's going to help.
Most of the marbles are being put on the $1.3 billion that you stole out of the environmental trust funds. The Conowingo is the number one issue.
What about the politically sensitive land that Mr. Rutherford sold off?
The Clean Chesapeake Coalition says that the Conowingo Dam is the number one initiative that needs to be addressed that you've completely ignored for 8 years.
I'd like to get from each of you, and if you can get it to a word, I would love it. The Union of Concerned Scientists says that we can expect in cities like Annapolis and Washington and many others significant tidal flooding by mid-century. 400 times a year was their estimate. Global warming, glaciers melting, sea level rise, our cities in peril. If you can get it to a word or two, I'd be grateful. Do you accept the basic premise that global warming has a connection to human activity and is a significant problem worthy of the time and attention of the next governor?
Of course it is. Of course it does.
Lieutenant Governor Brown.
Yes, and unlike Mr. Hogan, I do believe that a governor in Maryland can make a difference. You know, sustainable growth, transit-oriented development, renewable energy, energy efficiencies.
Thank you both very much. Let me move on. Mr. Brown, your opponent has made taxes a cornerstone of his campaign. Tax fatigue appears to be contributing to a dip in Governor O'Malley's popularity. Are Maryland residents overtaxed?
Let me be clear, Bruce, that I don't see the need, nor as governor, will I raise taxes in a Brown-Ullman administration. You know, Marylanders have done their part. When faced with a 40% increase in college tuition, fiscal mismanagement by the prior administration, spikes in crime, and overcrowded classrooms, Marylanders have done their part to protect schools and roads, safe neighborhoods, and the environment. Marylanders remember those days of the prior administration and don't want to go back. What I'm focusing on, and this is where Mr. Hogan and I agree, is in tax relief for Marylanders. But where we disagree, fundamental disagreement, is Mr. Hogan would start by giving tax relief to the smallest group of the largest, wealthiest corporations. Many of them are located outside of Maryland, whereas my tax relief starts with small entrepreneurial businesses, middle-class families. Small businesses create 2 out of every 3 jobs in Maryland. That's where the tax relief should start.
60 seconds for you, Mr. Hogan.
Well, so here's the thing. In 2010, in the last election, when Lieutenant Governor Brown and Martin O'Malley were running, he said, they both said, we don't envision the need for any additional tax revenues, which is the exact same thing he's saying this morning. Unfortunately, what they said and what they did was the complete opposite. He raised 40 taxes in a row. They've never met a tax they didn't like or one they didn't hike. And all of a sudden, I mean, he was arguing throughout this campaign that we can't cut our way to prosperity and my opponent wants to cut taxes and that's not the way to go. And then when the polls came out that showed that our message was resonating with voters all across the state and that we were gaining in a deep blue state in Maryland, that we had a toss-up race for governor, last week he completely changed his entire position. Now he's trying to adopt my position and say he's for cutting taxes for the middle class. You're the one that's been squeezing the middle class. You're the one that raised 38 regressive taxes that hurt people at the lower end of the income scale. I've led the fight against these taxes for the past 3.5 years. I'm the leading voice of opposition. You're the one that's been causing all the squeezing of the taxpayers.
Mr. Hogan, Mr. Brown,
Thank you.
Rebuttal.
Look, I didn't expect you to follow my campaign during the primary when we were speaking to strengthening Maryland's business climate and no taxes. But Larry, look, in order for you to provide the relief that you want, you're relying on your so-called savings plan. Baltimore Sun independently looked at your savings plan. In order for you to do it, you're calling for a $450 million cut in school construction. That's like Tulip Grove Elementary School in Bowie. That's like Clarksburg Middle School in Montgomery County. Also in your so-called savings plan, you're talking about increasing the property tax base by $300 million a year. It sounds a lot like the previous administration that said no new taxes and that you were part of and raised the property tax. You're talking about $300 million in property tax base increase, $450 million of school construction, and your so-called savings plan even had a $100 million mathematical error in the only plan that you put out on this campaign.
Mr. Hogan.
Well, first of all, with all due respect, Lieutenant Governor, I don't want to take math advice from a guy who says he cut $8 billion when he actually increased $10 billion, or a guy who wasted $288 million on a website that doesn't work. Okay, look, everything he just said was not true. I'm not planning to cut 1 penny in school construction costs, and multiple news reports just today and yesterday have criticized you for this ridiculous false charge. I'm not talking about raising any taxes. 3.5 years ago, I started a group called Change Maryland. It's a nonpartisan group of 118,000 people. Our primary mission is to bring fiscal responsibility and common sense to Annapolis, and we have been the leading voice of opposition to your tax increases for 3.5 years. And it's just not credible for you, who've raised taxes your entire life and throughout your entire term, to all of a sudden say that you're going to be fiscally responsible.
In terms of business, attracting businesses to Maryland and keeping here the businesses we have, are there changes in tax law, in the tax code, in the tax system that might help in this area? There's a case working its way that has worked its way from Maryland to the Supreme Court, Maryland versus Brian Wynn. It deals with taxation for companies that do business out of state and what they can claim a credit on. Are there changes in the tax code the next administration could make that would help in business growth, retention, and ultimately jobs?
Whose question?
Either.
Sure, I'll take that. Look, I've laid out tax credits and business tax deductions for small businesses. Look, I think about Maryland success stories and Maryland small businesses. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce ranks Maryland #1 for small and entrepreneurial businesses. They've looked at small business economies across the country. They say Maryland is #1. I think about a small business owner, got his start in his parents' garage. He was hardworking, great idea, got a little bit, some capital, and even assistance from the state early on, although I won't take credit for all of that. And today he's the #2 sports apparel company. That's Under Armour. That's a Maryland success story. That's why I start with small and entrepreneurial businesses.
Mr. Hogan.
Well, the Lieutenant Governor says he's starting with small and entrepreneurial businesses, but as a matter of fact, he's been killing small and entrepreneurial businesses for the past 8 years. Your policies, your tax policy, your regulatory policy, and your anti-business attitude has resulted in us losing 8,688 small and entrepreneurial businesses out of the state of Maryland. It's caused us to double unemployment. We've lost 200,000 jobs. And to say all of a sudden you're going to have this plan, you have a plan to turn things around. You say you're going to make us #1 in business and job development, but we're currently number 49 in our state economy, ranks 49th out of 50 states. If you had such a wonderful plan, why haven't you implemented it for the past 8 years? I mean, did you tell the governor about this great idea you had?
Quick response.
Look, Larry, you know better than that. You're a small business owner. You're in Maryland. You say you love Maryland, and I don't doubt that. But you're in Maryland doing well as a small business owner. Maryland is better than that. We've got a AAA bond rating coming out of the recession. We've created 16,000 jobs. We've got the strongest small business community in the country. We lead the nation in college affordability. We've reduced crime to the lowest levels. That doesn't happen by accident, Larry. It's decisions that you make in governing and partnering.
Well, look, we've had a AAA bond rating every year since 1973.
Almost in jeopardy under your administration.
It's not a great accomplishment, but we've lost businesses, jobs, and taxpayers at an alarming rate. You can't just make things up. Okay, we've had zero economic growth. Our state economy ranks 49th out of 50 states. We're 3rd in the nation in foreclosures. We've doubled unemployment. The economy is a mess, and everyone in Maryland seems to know it except you.
Candidates, we're going to take a break right here. Stand by, please, if you would. We'll take only one break during this hour, and it's here. In just a moment, more of News Channel 8's conversation with the major party candidates for governor in Maryland.